As you know, Rena, people will say, and you touched on it before, it's not really a disease because people have diseases that they don't choose, you know. There are some that they probably do. If somebody's obese and they have a heart attack, I suppose you could say, well, you shouldn't have been obese or something like that, or, you know, you didn't watch your cholesterol. But there are also diseases that, you know, somebody's doing everything right and all of a sudden they get hit with cancer or they get hit with whatever, you know. They will say, well, that's not really a disease because you chose to go down this path and people tell you since first grade, don't use drugs, and you still did it anyway. And you say what?
You know, addiction is a disease. And I know that that's the big argument by people that, oh, it's not a disease. Diabetes is a disease, cancer is a disease, high cholesterol is a disease, right? And what do you do to not die from those? Well, if you have diabetes, you watch your diet. You have to watch your diet every day, not just once a week, not just once a month. If you're diabetic, you got to watch what you eat every day. And maybe you have to take medication every day. And if you don't do that, what happens? Your diabetes gets bad and you could die. Addiction is a disease that I believe requires daily attention. Once I know that I'm an addict and I suffer from the disease of addiction and that it can kill me, because that's what this disease does, it kills people, or they end up in jail for a long time, then it's on me to make sure I don't use, to make sure that I engage in a process that's helping me, not hurting me. It's my, so no, part of their argument is right. You choose to lose, you choose to use. And if you use, you choose to lose. And I wake up every morning making a conscious decision not to use drugs today.
Well, you know, I hear a lot of people talking about this issue and they're talking and I'm listening to the radio and I'm thinking to myself, does this person really know what the hell they're talking about? A lot of times they don't. I know they're offering opinions based on what they have, but I always thought to myself, you know what? Rene Brown is the person I want to talk to because your opinion as a recovering long-term addict is as important, if not more important, I think, than anybody else's opinion. Do you feel that way? Do you feel that you have a different insight?
I think that I have some first-hand information, and you know, first-hand information is invaluable. You can't really teach it in a book or hear it at a conference or learn it anywhere else except for where I learned it, which was, you know, from using and then getting into recovery.
A lot of people become addicted, you know, they have a bad back or they get into an accident and then, you know, they get given oxycodone or something and then they end up following this path. But with Rena, it was the other way. It was kind of partying and experimenting with different stuff and ended up eventually on heroin. How did that happen to somebody like you?
I know, it's crazy. You know, I grew up in a nice household, middle-class family. Both my parents, hard workers. You know, my mom was remarried. I had siblings. I mean, there was no family trauma. You know, in high school, you know, smoking pot with people and drinking, you know, and then moving on to maybe pills at the time. You know, I'm 57, so, you know, we're talking the 70s, you know, trying things like, you know, THC or mescaline or whatever pills you found in your neighbor's mother's medicine cabinet, really. You know, I was 18 at the time. That was the drinking age. By now it's 1978, we're going into the 80s. Everybody's doing cocaine. It's half, you know, it's half socially acceptable at the time. And, you know, that's what I did. I moved out of my parents' house. I moved to Fall River, and I was drinking every day. And then I found cocaine, and then I found heroin, and then I found hypodermic needles, and I was off and running.
But, you know, a lot of people drink in high school, of course, and a lot of people smoke weed. And it seems to be a pretty big jump. Even people use coke, and they never really got that far out of control. What was the difference between you in terms of, you know, the marijuana and cocaine, but then kind of graduating, so to speak, to the real hard stuff?
You know, I probably had self-esteem issues, you know. It wasn't that my parents didn't tell me they loved me. They did. They showered us with love and presence, and, you know, their presence was there. You know, we were disciplined, but...
So what was the reason? Is there a reason that you can come up with?
There's probably like 10, but you know, one of them, this is what I did know. I knew that I didn't feel like other kids. I knew I felt ugly and stupid and that I dressed funny. I always felt like an outsider. I never felt part of. And when you get into that drug culture, when you start using, you meet a class of people that your common denominator is using drugs, and you become part of something. You know, so for me, I just never felt like I was part of anything. The minute I used, the minute I smoked that first joint, I felt different. And I felt smarter and prettier and, what I wore didn't matter, and I was cooler. I was loud, I was outgoing, I played sports. I mean, but you know, there was that gnawing feeling inside that you just can't describe, that you always felt like the outsider. I didn't come out of the closet publicly because I need the notoriety. You don't need this kind of publicity.
Yeah, right.
I got so tired of hearing about how Fall River and New Bedford are the epicenters of drug addiction, and people are dying every day, and once a junkie, always a junkie, and all these bad things. Not all bad things come out of the opiate crisis. I got 30 years clean and a great life and a great family. If one person hears my story and says, maybe there's hope for me, then it was all worth it.
Now, how long did you use heroin? Because heroin is, that's, once you get to that point,
that's the crown
strong
jewel. That's the opiate in opiate crisis.
Right.
It's the crown jewel.
Yeah.
Used heroin for the first time probably by September of 1978, the spring of '79, and once I used it, I stayed high on heroin till I got clean in 1987.
So we're talking about almost 10 years of
Yeah.
using heroin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So for the average person watching this right now has never used heroin. I'm sure there are people that have that are watching too. Most people have drank alcohol, or maybe they've had a joint or something like that. What is the feeling like when you're using heroin? Can you describe it?
Well, it's like, I guess if you ever had like a tooth pulled, and that first feeling of going under, or if you've ever been hospitalized, there's this feeling of, you just don't really care about anything at that point. One feeling you feel is nothing. You feel nothing. I found myself kidnapped, held for a long time, raped, bad things happened. I was about 18 and a half. And after I came out of that alive, I had a reason to use like I used. Because if you had gone through it too, you would use drugs like this too. Trauma is trauma. And if you are injured emotionally or spiritually, it doesn't have to be a physical or a sexual injury. It could just be, emotional and spiritual trauma. And, if you don't get the right help to repair the boo-boos you have deep down inside, yeah, I think you end up using drugs or some other unhealthy outlet to escape what it is you're feeling. And in the middle of all that, I had a son, and they threatened to take my son. And I said, I got to do something. So I did the rounds. I tried methadone clinics. I tried moving. I tried different boyfriends, whatever it is that you try to address it. And I ended up going to detox a couple times. I don't know whether it be a spiritual awakening or divine intervention, but here's what happened to me. I connected the insanity in my life to my daily drug use.
Right. But a lot of people go and they do it and they're successful, and then they fail again, and then they do it again. Why is that?
They relapse.
Is there a craving there?
I got to tell you something. And I embarked on a 12-step program of recovery. So there are certain things that I do every single day of my life. I've done them for the last 30 years. And you know what? They've been working for me because I'm still clean.
Well, we're glad to see that. It's fantastic. I mean, 30 years, you should be congratulated for that, because that is a great accomplishment that you've made.
Man, I was a menace to society.
What about education? Like, you were able to get into school and graduate and then go to law school and become an attorney. You got your Juris Doctor degree. I mean, how did you go from, really rock bottom to now a successful practicing attorney?
I went to detox for the very last time in 1987, and in a detox are the people who know about drug addiction, and they said, we think you need long-term inpatient treatment. And what they did was, this isn't just stop using drugs. There's a whole lifestyle change, and that's really what that helped me do. Get up in the morning, brush your teeth, take a shower, get dressed. And I went into therapy. I was in therapy for the first 10 years of my recovery.
Do you have to do anything now to maintain this?
Now, listen, I pray every day. I ask for the obsession to be removed. At night, I pray and say, thank you for another day clean. I still go to the 12-step meetings.
Even now, 30 years later?
30 years later, I still stay. I go to 12-step meetings. I have a sponsor, someone who is also clean for a long time. I talk with her regularly. I have girls I sponsor. I talk and interact with them regularly. And I wake up every morning making a conscious decision not to use drugs today.
Putting people in jail for using drugs. I mean, there are some places like, you know, in the Scandinavian countries that say, you know what, we're not even going to do that. What should we do? Should we do that? Should we put people in jail for using drugs, or should we do something else? Is there another way to do it? Is the war on drugs a big failure, like some people argue?
I think that we've become a society that wants the quickest, easiest way to the solution. We don't have enough places. I don't think detoxes are able to keep people long enough to get them kind of medically cleared to move into maybe a second phase where you can relearn to live your life. I think that jail should be the place of last resort. I think I've had a number of clients come to me years later and say, I hated you because I had to go to jail, but I've been clean, you know, and I got clean in jail.
It does seem like a merry-go-round. You were talking about the cat chasing the tail and the dog chasing the tail. You know, somebody's an addict like you were, you get arrested by the police, they bring you to jail, you get out, you go to recovery, you go back to the street, the police arrest you again, they get a search warrant. I mean, a lot of the resources that are going to this by using a law enforcement method primarily, there does seem to be a pretty good argument that maybe you ought to try something else, or at least add something else to that profile.
But I'll tell you what I'd like to see. There's not enough money in prevention and education. You know, I quit smoking because my daughter was coming home from kindergarten and afraid that I was going to die from smoking. You know why she came home from kindergarten? Because they were teaching them as soon as they could read and understand school lessons that smoking was not good for you. And it was a successful campaign. You know what drug education was for me in high school? One movie in the auditorium about how pot will lead you to heroin. And I was sitting in the back after I smoked a joint going, that'll never be me. And you know what? 2 short laters, that was exactly me. I don't think that we're spending enough money on prevention and education.
I heard people say, and they can be harsh, you know, they're like, well, you know, the EMTs are being called out to administer Narcan. And I've heard people say, oh, you know what, just forget it, just let them go. That's pretty horrible because we're talking about a human being.
People forget that drug addicts are somebody's daughter, somebody's son, somebody's mother, somebody's father,
if it's your
somebody's
family
niece,
member, you're not going to be saying that.
Listen, my roles in my family are many, and people forget they're not just junkies. They're live human beings that are absolutely related by blood to somebody. And somebody is going to suffer if we just let the addicts die.
Chris Heron told me that it's not just the person themselves that suffer, it's all the family. The wives, the cousins,
listen,
the
after an
husbands.
addict dies, the only people suffering are the ones that are related to them. People are getting saved from Narcan, and some of them are actually staying clean.
What would be your last thought as we leave here today in terms of a positive outlook, things that we should be doing as a society to try to get this thing under control?
I want to say that it's not a hopeless situation, that if I'm sitting here with 30 years clean, I'm that addict that people would say, she's just a junkie, she's just a whore, she's just a nobody. And thank God that people in treatment facilities are those unspoken angels, people in the detoxes, people that are working halfway houses, people that are working at therapy clinics or counseling services. Those are your unsung heroes because they're the first line of defense. You know, us as lawyers in criminal defense, I don't have any anonymity. I'm not ashamed that I'm a member with long-term recovery from drug addiction. There isn't anybody that doesn't know that about me. And I wish that more people with long-term recovery would break their silence and come out and say, hey, you know, #MeToo, I've been clean a long, long time, and that we can survive this, because it's a war out there.
Well, you're a role model, certainly, for people that are, you know, struggling. Rena, it's been a very fascinating half hour. I was always interested in not only hearing your story, but hearing your opinion, and your opinion is just as important, or maybe even more important than anybody else's, so thank you for joining us here.
Anytime. Thank you, Paul.
All right, Rene Brown. She's a well-respected attorney in good standing with the Massachusetts Bar Association.
Thank God.
I'm Paul Santos. We'll see you next time for New Bedford Connections. Good night.